Today we're going to solve the dilemma of how to plate a big breakfast. In some countries this is called a big breakfast, others call it a full breakfast. There are some variations between them, but one thing that remains the same is that they both have so many items that need to go on the plate. With all these ingredients, including some sloppy components and items with similar colours, our plate can lack a bit of life. There's nothing wrong with this, but we can do better. If you're new here, welcome! I'm Taryn. Through this channel, my website and Instagram, I like to inspire and teach how easy it is to make beautiful food. The biggest problem we're facing is that there are so many components on this plate, all piled on together. We've also got two of a lot of these components. 2 pieces of toast, 2 eggs, 2 mushrooms, 2 tomatoes, and so on. Usually we try to plate components in odd numbers since it's more appealing to the eye. So what can we do to overcome this? We've also got these baked beans, a sloppy component. They don't look that great just spooned on the plate. So what can we do with these? Then we've got a very limited colour selection we're dealing with. There's a lot of browns and dull earthy colours. So how can we elevate this big breakfast to something amazing? Let's start again and see what we can come up with. These are all the ingredients we're working with today. We've got a nice fresh loaf of bread, some streaky bacon, breakfast sausages. Over here we've got some hash browns, baked beans, eggs, mushrooms, thyme for flavour, and some tomatoes. Before we can get into the plating, we need to do some cooking. I'm sure you know how to cook all of these things, but one problem we have is that a lot of these ingredients are usually fried, so it's tricky to get everything cooked and hot at the same time. When I worked in a hotel on the breakfast shift, we hardly used a fry pan at all. We used steam ovens, deep fryers, an electric oven, and had lots of griddle space. But since we don't have all of this in our home kitchens, we need to do things differently. My best advice here is to make use of the fry pan to get some colour on the food and finish it in the oven. This way you can have it all hot and ready at the same time. When you're making breakfast for a group of people, the more prep you can have done ahead of time, the less stressful and more fun it is. For cooking bacon, one way you can have your prep done and avoid using the fry pan is to lay it out on some tin foil, overlapping it just a little. I'm only cooking 4 pieces here, but you can put on as many as you can comfortably fit. Then roll it up and store the roll in the fridge. When you come to cooking it the next day, all you need to do is roll it open on an oven tray and pop it into the oven to grill. Another bonus is there's no dirty pan to clean. Next we've got our tomatoes. I've got these smallish whole fresh tomatoes and I like to cut them in half. Of course you could use cherry tomatoes and make blistered tomatoes if you prefer. This is where we can start the cooking process by searing the tomato halves. You only need to cook these briefly, about a minute or 2 in a hot fry pan to get a nice bit of colour. Make sure you start with the cut side down as it'll get the most colour and look better on the plate. Once you've flipped them over, it's time to season them and bring out the flavour. You can also add some fresh herbs. I love using a few fresh thyme leaves on top. When the tomatoes are in the oven, the seasoning and flavours will seep in, making them super tasty. Now that they're seared, we can put them into an oven tray, ready to go in. While the pan is hot, I'm going to do the same with the whole mushrooms. I'm putting them in with the presentation side down to get a little colour and charred flavour. After a couple of minutes, turn them over and season them generously. I'm using the same seasonings as I did for the tomatoes. I often add a little splash of water to the pan, which allows them to steam a bit and soften in the centre. These aren't fully cooked through yet. If we cut them in half, they'll still be raw in the centre, so we can put the tray into the oven with the bacon to finish the cooking process. I don't know about you, but I find sausages often cook much nicer in the oven too. I still sear them off in a fry pan over a medium heat to get that lovely golden colour, but then I pop them in the oven to finish the cooking. If you do cook them completely in the fry pan, make sure your pan isn't too hot. Otherwise the casing can burst, which doesn't look that great. I don't have any tips for the baked beans. Warm them however you like. In a small pot on the stove, or in the microwave, or if you still have room in the oven, you could even pop them in there for a few minutes. The bread you choose for your big breakfast has a big influence on the overall look of the plate. I'm using a ciabatta loaf today, but if you were to use a dark rye bread, it would add a different colour to your plate, affecting the way you might plate your breakfast. These slices are oval shaped, but you could use square slices of bread or even triangles, which would bring a different shape to the plate. The ingredients we choose to use have a significant impact on our plating decisions. So think about what you're plating and then how you can plate it for the best visual impact. I'll discuss some tips to consider while plating soon. Remember, flavour does come before looks, but only just. Lastly, we need to cook the eggs, because eggs really need to be served as soon as possible after they're cooked. I like to cook them in rings when I want a nice presentation. Make sure you spray the rings so the eggs don't stick. Warm up the fry pan to a medium heat with some butter for extra flavour and oil to ensure the eggs don't stick to the pan. I suggest cracking the eggs into a ramekin first and then pouring it into the ring while holding it down. This will minimise the egg white seeping out. If any does leak out, don't worry, you can cut off the excess after the eggs are cooked. You can get silicone rings for this job, but if you don't use them often, there are other options. Adding a lid to the pan for a few minutes creates some steam which helps cook the egg white. These look pretty good to me. I'm just going to slide them onto a board briefly to cut the excess pieces off. Don't they look great in their perfect circles? Let's get them plated before they spoil. The blue plate we used earlier made for a perfect colour contrast, but I'm thinking we should use a rectangular plate this time. The blue makes the food stand out, which is great, but maybe using a rectangular plate might give us more options for a visually appealing presentation. I'm going to start by adding 2 pieces of warm buttered toast, slightly overlapping here on the side. On the opposite end, I'm going to put the hash browns. These 2 components are relatively similar in colour and size, so we don't want them next to each other on the plate. Then we've got the baked beans. Instead of spooning them on the plate and having the sauce running all over the place, let's put them in a little ramekin to keep things tidy. This one has a bit of a pattern, so it'll bring a hint of colour to the dish too. Next I'll add the bacon. The bacon and sausages look similar, longish brown strips, so I'm going to keep them separate. As I mentioned earlier, we often try to plate things in odd numbers because it's known to be more pleasing to the eye. If we were to put 3 of everything on this plate, it wouldn't be a big breakfast, it would be a gigantic breakfast that very few people will be able to finish. To get around this problem, I'm putting similar things on opposite sides, and suddenly the even quantities don't even seem as obvious. This is also a good way to break up the similar colours we have in these big breakfast items. For the eggs, I'm going to split the pair and put 1 on each side of the plate. Be careful to keep everything within the edges of the plate. I personally don't like it when ingredients are hanging over the edge of the plate they're served on. I'm going to split up the mushrooms and tomatoes, adding 1 to each side of the plate. These components bring some colour to the plate, so having them in a couple of places enhances the effect of colour. Suddenly, this doesn't look near as crowded as the first plate, where everything was just piled up, does it? We can't leave it here though. It's the little details that leave an impression. Let's add some seasoning to the eggs and some lettuce leaves to garnish. It always amazes me how a few small leaves or microgreens can elevate any plate. What do you think of this big breakfast? I think it must be time for me to enjoy mine. By the way, if you love breakfast but don't want to have all the trimmings, check out this video. In it we replate a simple bacon and egg breakfast and take it to a whole new level with just a few minor tweaks and additions. See you over there.